All right, welcome back from our break. Bernard Olson, CNN. So, taking a little break from politics. I know we've been talking politics for about 37 hours straight. We're going to take a little break from that and talk a little bit about ERM, or enterprise risk management. When we talk about enterprise risk management, we're talking about a strategic business discipline that really supports the achievement of an organization's objectives by addressing the full spectrum of its risks and managing the combined impact of those risks as an interrelated risk portfolio. Now, specifically, we're going to take a look at two different scenarios. One that happened here on location at Indiana State Fairgrounds. As you can tell, we're in the most luxurious box suite here at the fairgrounds, as well as one that happened in the natural disaster of, unfortunately, both the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Now, to give us a little bit more context on what happened here on location and how enterprise risk management was crucial, we'll hand it off to Matt, and Matt will give us a little bit more in-depth perspective on how ERM impacted the decisions made here at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. Matt?
As the Indiana State Fair Commission and Board, our mission is to preserve and enhance the Indiana State Fairgrounds and the annual Indiana State Fair for the benefit of all citizens of Indiana. Our first core value is the belief in operating in a safe and environmentally conscious manner. Music concerts and festivals are some of the biggest events that we host annually, and they often draw some of the biggest crowds in the state each year. The planning is extremely detailed, and we are very careful in overseeing the entire experience from every angle. From a risk management standpoint, using a comprehensive ERM approach with the latest data, strategies, and coordination is critical. To help describe current key areas of risk and our current ERM practices developed through many past lessons learned, we will reference the tragic and deadly accident at the fairgrounds in August 2011. Many risks are under the control of the Commission and Board. Governance requires strict contracts with all of our performers, managers, vendors, and persons conducting business on the fairgrounds property. Disaster and liability insurance terms must be fully validated along with all limits on a case-by-case basis for individual events. That is concerts, fairs, shows, competitions, festivals, and more. Prior to the infamous Sugarland concert in August 2011, these requirements were handled insufficiently with Mid-America Sound Corporation. Hiring practices and training certification is mandatory to ensure that all workers are properly qualified to perform their duties and handle equipment. Without question, greater supervision was needed during the events leading up to the tragic concert, including the stage rigging assembly, emergency announcement system, and evacuation procedures with egress routes. Naturally, employment practices guide safety processes and protocol. Decisiveness is a necessity in these practices, and during the fatal concert, correct, timely decisions to move the crowd towards shelter was not made effectively. Operationally, events conducted on the Indiana State Fairgrounds must closely monitor all environment conditions and weather indications. Authorities must be notified of all potentially dangerous scenarios and should be on site in order to reduce response time. Performers and vendors need to be aware of the latest conditions or potential conditions, which was not the case for the Sugarland concert prior to the deadly wind gusts at the time they took the stage. Inspectors and local code enforcement officials are responsible for ensuring all preventative precautions, with full understanding of equipment and scaffolding material stress limits, including all wind factors and known hazards. Needless to say, the coordination between stage equipment limitations and the potential weather forecast, including a severe thunderstorm watch with high wind speeds, was severely lacking during the tragic event in August 2011. There are no excuses for the failure to preserve our mission and properly ensure the safety of the crowds during this tragic accident. Aside from the unpredictable nature of individual fans and perhaps the psychology of the crowd regarding instinctive human reactions, the only risk that was entirely out of anyone's control was the weather. More specifically, the powerful wind gusts reaching speeds above 60 miles per hour. There are many formal ERM changes that resulted from this tragic accident nearly 5 years ago, and we will continue working hard to ensure such a disaster does not happen in the future. Our holistic risk management philosophy of governance, planning, execution, and constant evaluation across all departments and groups involved with the Indiana State Fairgrounds events is more defined than ever before. We now have a designated ERM champion, our Chief Risk Officer, who oversees all risks facing our enterprise and has the authority to be an immediate change agent as necessary. Our organizational culture now has a heightened sense of awareness across departments, and previous silo mentalities have been now replaced with communication, education, and initiative. We proactively conduct focus groups and brainstorming meetings to ensure new ideas are constantly thinking ahead of future fairground risks. And lastly, our senior leadership team uses the latest data analysis to prioritize all operational and strategic risks, studying other tragic and non-tragic event accidents to be better prepared through integrating and quantifying risks across the board while looking for all possible exposures and risk opportunities. Thank you, and we hope to see you at the fairgrounds soon.
Thanks, Matt. Great analysis, and I think we did a good job here of really diving into enterprise risk management techniques that were really executed via the case study that we read at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. Now, we see that ERM really provides a structured process for the management of all risks, whether those risks are primarily quantitative or qualitative in nature. It really doesn't matter. What we're really focusing on is we're looking to view the effective management of risk as a competitive advantage and really seek to embed risk management as a component in all decisions throughout any organization, whether it be at Indiana State Fairgrounds or the one we're about to talk about via the natural disasters of both the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Now, to lead us off with that, I'll hand it over to Larry, who will talk a little bit more about those natural disasters in Japan. Larry?
Hi, my name is Larry Nicholson, and I will be presenting the information on the impact of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami on the United States manufacturers as well as manufacturers and suppliers in Japan and worldwide. Natural disasters, they occur frequently depending on which region of the country that you're in. Many disasters can be predicted and many of them cannot be predicted, which leads to a lot of uncertainty to a lot of businesses as well as to a lot of individuals. In this particular case, we're going to talk about the complex risks and the correlated risk associated with the disaster, as well as the types of losses, enterprise risk management benefits, as well as some of the tools and techniques that the manufacturers and suppliers could use going forward in the event of another catastrophe, such as Tohoku. Some of the complex risks associated with the disaster was really the supply chain being impacted by the suppliers not being able to deliver a lot of materials and supplies to the manufacturers, which in turn prevented the manufacturers from really putting their cars in the market and finalizing their production of the vehicles. Also, customers were charged higher prices for vehicles that were on the market due to limited stock as well as limited painting pigments and things of that nature. Correlated risk was the earthquake, period, and of the risk associated with business interruption, as well as catastrophes and fatalities, as well as other physical damage to the buildings that we know of. Types of loss, we'll get into the indirect loss. Really, the auto manufacturers as well as the suppliers lost a lot of money during this catastrophe. Goldman Sachs estimated that they were losing about $200 million a day. And for that whole week, they lost about $2 billion, which is really substantial. The disaster led to many of the plants closing down, period, and as well as employees not being able to return to work, thus not making a salary or income during the period of loss, as well as a lot of reputational and brand risk associated with the disaster. Many of the customers that were buying vehicles, as well as the manufacturers, knew that the suppliers could not provide the supplies needed to continue the production, and therefore many of the customers remembered the lack of production for the company. Direct loss, there were fatalities, unfortunately, due to the earthquake. There was a lot of physical damage to many of the factories, which led to there not being electricity, water, and power to the different factories. And there was also loss to inventory. Many of the supplies were also damaged and gone as a result of the catastrophe. So, how did the industry really respond to the catastrophe as a whole? Many of the auto manufacturers are reliant on many different plants globally to build their vehicles. So when you build a vehicle, there's a lot that go into constructing one vehicle. There's the motor, there's the transmission, there's the radio, there's the GPS. There's a lot of different components that go into building a vehicle. Many supplies were reliant on suppliers outside of what the manufacturer could provide. So unless they had every supply needed to construct a vehicle and put on the market, they were not able to, because many of the supplies they were not able to receive. Disaster led to a quick supply shortage globally. The supply shortage led to a shortage in vehicles, especially those with certain colors. Many of the customers were forced to pay higher prices for vehicles due to the shortage. And there was temporary shutdown of plants in other regions to continue production, but not at the full capacity. And also, due to the catastrophe, many auto manufacturers and suppliers really reevaluated their lean processes in order to mitigate and speed up business if a catastrophe were to come again. Okay, how to mitigate future exposure? They can really learn from other manufacturers. General Motors took parts from higher end vehicles, placing in higher demand vehicles to meet supply demands. A really good strategy that they implemented actually gave time for parts to become available from other suppliers while dealers exhausted current inventory. Also, they could also, instead of having one plant that actually does everything in one geographic location, they could create multiple plants that are responsible for the same production. Or maybe not at full capacity, but at maybe a minor capacity, just in case the plant that delivers the most production, if they were to go down, the second or third plant could also backfill some of the work, thus continuing operations for the company. Additional thoughts, can correlated risk be avoided? Correlated risks really can't be avoided. Again, as mentioned earlier, it's really hard for companies to predict natural disasters, in which it's really hard to determine whether or not they're going to come, and also what the severity of the natural disaster is going to be. So it's really hard to predict it. Thus, it will be very hard for companies to avoid the correlated risk associated with the natural disasters. Now, companies can mitigate as much as possible from the natural disasters. They could put processes in place. They could build their building to a certain quality. So if there was an earthquake, the building would sustain minimal damage. Or they could have employees work from home. Different strategies like that. Again, you can't avoid it completely, but you can put processes and strategies in place to mitigate the correlated risk associated with the natural disaster. And benefits of enterprise risk management is really having the organization identify all the different risks that is a possibility for the company to sustain. Whether it's in the marketing department, what are the risks associated with marketing? There's the brand risk, there's the reputational risk. And from the financial perspective, also identifying all the financial risk associated with enterprise risk management. Will the revenues be impacted? Will the investments or the assets that we own be impacted? Looking at all the different risks associated with that. So having every area of the company identify risk and all working together to either put processes in place to mitigate risk or could potentially avoid risk by not exploring that activity altogether. But enterprise risk management really gets the organization to be able to identify all the risks or most of the risks associated with their business, internal and external, as well as getting all the different departments on board with understanding how their department also has a really big impact from a risk management perspective on the organization as a whole. Now, in the Tohoku case, the big benefit of enterprise risk management for them is really getting your suppliers, your vendors, the customers, the automakers, everyone involved with the supply chain on board with if a natural disaster occurs, how do we respond? How do we position ourselves in which we could sustain minimum damage and minimum impact to delivering these vehicles to the customers, whether that be also building multiple plants across the globe just in case one plant were to go down, or engaging in activities from third parties who could actually fill in the gaps until the buildings or the employees got back running from the factory that was impacted. Things like that is really the true benefit of enterprise risk management. But that's all of our thoughts for this case. Again, this was a really good case, a huge case for the auto industry. Very unfortunate that there were a lot of fatalities and the amount of revenues lost for the companies as well as customers being impacted by rising prices in vehicles and things of that nature. But this is just one case out of many where natural disasters had a really huge impact across every business unit, across the entire supply chain, as well as the customer for this particular industry. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Larry. Thanks for your analysis. Really appreciate your input. Now, when we talk about ERM, kind of wrapping it up here, when we talk about ERM, we're talking about enterprise risk management that encompasses all areas of organizational exposure to risk. Now, when we talk about that, we've seen examples in both case studies, really, of financial, operational, reporting, compliance, governance, strategic, and even some reputational, really. And what we look for is we're looking to ERM that prioritizes and manages those exposures as an interrelated risk portfolio rather than individual silos of what we read in our text. So, really appreciate using those examples. We really appreciate our time here at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. When we come back from break, we'll talk a little bit about more why Florida State University is the best university in the nation, as well as debate a little bit why Dalvin Cook did not win the Heisman last year. We'll be right back.